I should have known Vanessa was up to something the moment she leaned in my doorway with that sugary smile of hers. It was the kind of smile she used when she wanted to borrow my clothes, my money, or my sanity. But that night, I was too excited to notice the warning signs. I had a date, an actual date with Liam Porter, the quiet, considerate guy I'd met at a campus networking event. After weeks of awkward flirtation and shy smiles across study tables, he'd finally asked if I wanted to grab dinner with him on Friday, and I'd been floating ever since. The apartment smelled faintly of vanilla candles and the stir-fry I'd made earlier, a comforting mix that helped calm my nerves. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting my navy blue blouse for the 5th time, wishing I had someone trustworthy to ask for an honest opinion. Vanessa had offered her help, but her idea of support was leaning over my shoulder and saying things like, "Are you sure that's the look you want? It's safe." Her tone was always wrapped in silk but dipped in poison. Still, I told myself she was just blunt, not malicious. Vanessa was everything. I wasn't bold, stunningly gorgeous, and effortlessly magnetic. She walked into any room like she owned it, and most people believed she did. I used to admire it, but living with her had taught me how easily charisma can turn into manipulation. She liked being the center of attention, no matter whose spotlight she had to steal. As I applied mascara, she perched on my bed, swinging her legs like a bored teenager. "So," she said, "Liam, that's the quiet one, right? The one who barely talks?" I nodded, feeling my cheeks warm. "He talks to me," I said, maybe too defensively. Vanessa raised an eyebrow like that fact surprised her. "Well, I hope it goes well," she said, though her voice held a strange edge. "Guys like him don't usually go for sweet girls." Sweet. The word landed with a sting. It wasn't a compliment. It was code for plain, predictable, unexciting. I brushed it off and told myself she didn't mean anything by it, even though deep down I knew better. As I checked the time, 6:28 p.m., my stomach fluttered with anticipation. Liam would already be at the restaurant. He'd texted earlier, saying he got there a little early to secure good seats. The thought made me smile. I grabbed my purse, trying to steady my breath. Vanessa watched me with a strange intensity, like she was studying me. "You look fine," she finally said. A bit understated, but whatever. Maybe he'll find that charming. Her voice dripped with something I couldn't name, but I swallowed the uneasy feeling. Just as I slipped on my shoes, Vanessa suddenly jumped to her feet. "Oh gosh, I totally forgot I have to run out and meet a friend," she said, grabbing her jacket. "It's nothing big. You go have fun." She dashed out the front door with unusual urgency, leaving me blinking after her. Something about the way she fled made suspicion prickle at the back of my mind, but I shook it off. Vanessa had a chaotic social life. Her sudden departures weren't uncommon. I grabbed my things and locked up the apartment behind me. The restaurant, a cozy place called Maple and Sage, was only a 10-minute walk from our building. The evening air felt crisp, carrying the scent of grilled food from nearby patios, and the distant sound of someone playing guitar. I replayed bits of conversations Liam and I had shared, his soft laugh, the way he pushed his glasses up his nose when he felt shy. My nerves curled into something warm as I approached the glowing sign of the restaurant. I stepped inside, scanning the room for that familiar dimpled smile, and then my heart stopped. There she was, Vanessa, my roommate, sitting at a table near the window with Liam. For a second, I thought I'd hallucinated it, but no. She was leaning forward, twirling a strand of hair, smiling at him with the exact flirtatious charm I'd watched her use on countless unsuspecting guys. And Liam, he looked confused, awkward, and a little lost. But he was there, with her, at my table, on my date. I stood frozen in the doorway, unable to make sense of it. But when Vanessa spotted me, her smirk told me everything I needed to know. She had stolen my date, and the night was about to get much worse. I don't know how long I stood there before my legs finally moved. The hostess asked if I needed help, but her voice sounded muffled, distant, like I was underwater. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked toward their table, each step heavy with disbelief. Vanessa saw me approaching and her smile widened, transforming into something predatory and triumphant. Liam turned too, his brows knitting with confusion, But Vanessa was faster. She touched his arm lightly and said, "There she is. Elena, you're late." Her voice carried just loudly enough for people at nearby tables to turn and look, which only made the humiliation prick hotter across my skin. "Late?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Vanessa, what are you doing here?" Liam blinked between us, clearly thrown off, and I could practically see the gears in his mind trying to make sense of the scene. But Vanessa spoke before he could. "I told Liam I'd help you out," she said sweetly. "You were freaking out about tonight, remember? You begged me to come make sure you didn't embarrass yourself." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was such a bold, polished lie, delivered with a straight face and a pitying tilt of her head that I froze. Liam's eyes softened with sympathy, like he genuinely believed her. And that hurt worst of all because I had hoped he saw me as someone worth believing. The restaurant felt suddenly too warm, too bright, too public. I hated that Vanessa had made me the spectacle yet again. "I didn't ask you to come," I said quietly, my voice shaking despite my best effort. "And you know that." Vanessa laughed, a light, airy sound that grated against my nerves. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, waving a hand. "I'm just trying to help. You get so in your head sometimes." She looked at Liam with an exaggerated expression of sympathy, painting me as fragile and socially inept. I wanted to scream, but Liam's uncomfortable shifting made the words die in my throat. "I think I misunderstand what's happening," Liam said finally, rubbing the back of his neck. "Vanessa said you weren't feeling confident and asked her to come ahead of you." Even as he said it, I could tell he was unsure, torn between two versions of the story. My stomach twisted because I could see the doubt forming. Vanessa always knew how to plant it. She had this way of making lies sound reasonable, even considerate. I straightened my shoulders and spoke gently, but firmly. "I never said anything like that. I was looking forward to tonight. I don't know why she's here." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please," she said. "You're making this awkward for him. Just admit you freaked out. It's okay to be nervous about dating." The implication hung in the air that she was doing me a favor by hijacking my life. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, a mixture of anger and humiliation boiling inside me. Liam excused himself to take a quick call, though the strain in his expression made me suspect he just needed a break from the chaos. The moment he walked away, Vanessa's expression shifted instantly. Gone was the soft facade. In its place was a cold, victorious smirk. "You should have seen your face," she whispered, leaning back smugly. "Honestly, Elena, you make this too easy. You can't expect a guy like him to choose that." Her hand waved vaguely at my outfit, my hair, my entire being. It was in that moment I finally understood something I'd been avoiding for months. Vanessa didn't just want attention. She needed to win. Over anyone. At any cost. She thrived on comparison, on pushing people down to lift herself up. And I had been her easiest target, the one she knew wouldn't fight back. But standing there, I felt something inside me harden, not anger exactly, but something close. "I'm going home," I said quietly, because arguing would only feed her satisfaction. "Enjoy your evening." Vanessa shrugged like she'd expected nothing else. "Don't worry, I will," she said, pulling out her phone. "I'll tell you how it goes." I turned and walked out of the restaurant, each step shaking but determined. The cool night air hit my face like a slap, but it was a relief to be away from her suffocating presence. The humiliation clung to me like smoke, but beneath it, something else simmered. Resolve. Back at the apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, replaying the betrayal over and over in my mind. Maybe I shouldn't have expected better from her. Maybe I should have listened to the small internal alarm that always went off around Vanessa. I stared at the ceiling, my emotions tangled and raw, unsure if I was more hurt or angry. But before I could untangle anything, the front door rattled with a sudden knock, sharp and urgent. When I opened it, a tall man in a tailored coat stood on the doorstep, looking both exhausted and determined. His eyes flicked past me into the apartment before settling back on my face. "Is Vanessa Hale here?" he asked, his jaw tight. "I'm her husband." And just like that, everything I thought I knew snapped apart. For a few seconds, I could only stare at the man on my doorstep, my brain scrambling to catch up with the words he'd just spoken. Husband. The word echoed in my head like a bell struck too hard, vibrating through every thought I tried to form. Vanessa had never once mentioned being married, not in the 2 years we lived together, not through all the stories she spun about her terrible exes or her commitment issues. The man's expression was tight with frustration, and something deeper, something tired. I stepped aside instinctively, letting him in because my shock overpowered every instinct I should have had. He walked in with a kind of restrained urgency, the kind that comes from someone who's been holding himself together for too long. My name is Andrew, he said, taking a deep breath as he scanned the apartment. I've been trying to track her down for months. She blocked my number, changed her address, left without a trace. His jaw flexed as he exhaled sharply. And I could tell this wasn't just a man looking for a runaway spouse, this was someone unraveling. I shut the door slowly, leaning against it for support as the gravity of what he was saying hit me. Vanessa told me you were her roommate, he continued, his voice strained but controlled. But she didn't tell you about me, did she? His eyes met mine, and I didn't have the energy to hide my reaction. I shook my head, still stunned. Not even once, I said quietly. I didn't know she was married. I didn't even know she'd been in a serious relationship recently. Andrew sighed, a pained sound, and pinched the bridge of his nose. That sounds exactly like her. As he paced the living room, I watched him piece together fragments of his own story, and for the first time, I felt something I'd never felt toward Vanessa before, fear. It wasn't fear of Andrew. He didn't seem dangerous. It was fear of how easily she had deceived both of us. Fear of what else she had hidden. Fear of what kind of person I had been sharing my home with. Andrew finally stopped pacing and looked at me with an expression that mixed exhaustion with regret. I'm sorry to bring this into your life, he said, but I need to find her. I need answers. I swallowed hard, running through the night's events in my mind. The restaurant, the smugness, the lies. The man across from me hadn't been the twist, I realized that now. He was the key to understanding what had been happening all along. She's out on a date, I said finally, my voice tight, with someone she pretended was my date. The absurdity of it hit us both at once, and Andrew shook his head slowly, like he couldn't believe how tangled this had become. Of course she is, he muttered under his breath. Before either of us could say another word, the front door burst open, and Vanessa strode in, her heels clacking sharply against the floor. She froze the moment she saw Andrew, her face draining of color so fast it was almost impressive. For once, she didn't have a witty line ready. She didn't have a smirk. She didn't have control. Andrew's voice cut through the silence like a blade. We're doing this now, Vanessa. His tone was steady, but the tension beneath it crackled through the air. Why are you here? She snapped, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. She glanced at me like she expected support, like I would step in and rescue her from whatever confrontation was coming. But those days were gone now. Her betrayal at the restaurant had gutted something inside me, and the truth Andrew brought had burned the rest to ash. Vanessa read the shift in my expression because her eyes hardened instantly. What did you tell him? She demanded. I didn't have to tell him anything, I said, feeling something fierce rising in my chest. Your lies did that for you. Vanessa scoffed and crossed her arms, but her posture was more defensive than dismissive. Andrew stepped closer to her, maintaining a respectful distance but radiating a frustration so deep it filled the room. You disappeared, he said quietly. You drained our joint account. You cut off communication. And now I find you here, pretending to be single? Pretending to live an entirely different life? Vanessa's jaw clenched. You don't get to judge me, she hissed, but the crack in her voice betrayed her. Andrew shook his head. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to understand. His voice softened slightly, and that softness hurt more than anger could have. Why did you leave, Vanessa? Why did you run? For a moment, just a flicker, something vulnerable crossed her face. Fear, guilt, maybe even sorrow. But then it was gone. You wouldn't understand, she whispered tightly, staring at the floor. Andrew slowed his breathing, steady and deliberate. Try me. The words hung between them, heavy and pulsing with unfinished history. Vanessa swallowed, her eyes shifting toward me, then back to him, like she couldn't decide which life she needed to defend. I stood still, heart racing, fully aware that whatever she said next would expose everything and change everything. And then Vanessa lifted her chin, meeting Andrew's gaze with a mix of defiance and desperation, and finally began to speak. Vanessa stood there as if she were balancing on the edge of a breaking cliff, her breathing shallow and uneven. When she finally opened her mouth, her voice came out rougher than I'd ever heard it. "I left because everything felt like it was suffocating me," she said, not looking at either of us. "The expectations, the marriage, the constant decisions I didn't have control over." Andrew's brows drew together, confusion and hurt swirling behind his eyes. I felt myself leaning in despite everything, trying to understand where truth ended and performance began. "You had control," Andrew said quietly, stepping closer but still giving her space. "Every major decision we made together. I asked you what you wanted at every step." Vanessa shook her head sharply, her hair whipping around her face like a shield. "You say that," she replied, her voice trembling. "But you never listened when I wanted something different. You wanted a family. You wanted a stable house. You wanted a life I wasn't ready for." The honesty in that admission hit the room like a cold wind. But it didn't feel complete, not with everything that had unraveled. I folded my arms, watching her carefully, feeling my own anger simmering beneath the surface. "If that's true," I said, "why lie to me? Why humiliate me tonight? Why steal my date?" The questions came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't take them back. Vanessa finally looked at me, her eyes wild and tired and strangely empty. "Because," she said slowly, "I didn't want you to have what I couldn't. I didn't want anyone to have it. Not when I felt like everything I tried to hold on to slipped away." Her words sank into my chest like sand, messy and suffocating. I wanted to feel sympathy, but the memory of her smirking across the restaurant table burned too hot. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, the conflict on his face painful to witness. "You could have told me any of this," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "You could have talked to me instead of disappearing." Vanessa wrapped her arms around herself like she was freezing, even though the apartment was warm. "Talking wouldn't have changed anything," she whispered, "because I didn't know how to stay." Andrew's face softened in a way that made my stomach clench. It wasn't pity, it was heartbreak. The kind of heartbreak that comes from loving someone who doesn't know how to love themselves back. Vanessa looked away, biting her lip to keep it steady. I suddenly felt like a witness to a private tragedy I had never been invited to understand. But then Vanessa's gaze flicked to me again, this time with something cold and defensive rising behind her exhaustion. "You wouldn't get it, Elena," she snapped. "You've always coasted through life with everything handed to you." The accusation stunned me, and my mouth fell open in disbelief. "Handed to me?" I echoed, my voice rigid. "Vanessa, you bullied me for months. You mocked my insecurities. You inserted yourself into my personal life and tried to make me look pathetic tonight." My chest tightened as the words spilled out, each one a wound she'd tried to hide under false compassion. Vanessa's expression hardened. "I only pushed because you needed to toughen up," she said, her voice brittle. "People take advantage of girls like you." Andrew let out a breath that sounded dangerously close to anger. "And what exactly do you call what you did to her?" he asked, his tone sharp in a way I hadn't heard before. Vanessa's face flinched, like she hadn't expected him to defend me. "This isn't about her," she muttered. "It's about us." "No," Andrew said firmly. "It's about the lies, Vanessa. The lies you told me. The lies you told her. The lies you built your new life on." His words hit like a hammer, and Vanessa's composure cracked visibly. She pressed her fingertips to her temples, breathing faster, as if the pressure inside her skull was threatening to explode. The silence in the room thickened, pressing in on all of us. I watched her carefully, expecting anger to flare, but instead her shoulders sagged, her body folding inward. "I didn't know how to live with the guilt," she whispered. "The guilt of wanting things I wasn't supposed to want. The guilt of disappointing you. The guilt of choosing myself." Andrew's eyes softened again, but this time he didn't move toward her. He stayed rooted to the floor, a barrier she couldn't cross. "Running didn't make the guilt disappear," he said gently. "It just spread it to everyone you touched." Vanessa looked up at him, her eyes glossy, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked like someone who knew she'd lost. But before either of us could speak, her phone vibrated loudly in her purse, slicing through the tension like a knife. She fumbled for it, glanced at the screen, and her face went stark white. Her breath hitched, and she looked between us with a horror I couldn't explain. "Elena," she whispered, her voice cracking wide open. "You need to see this! It's about Liam!" Vanessa's hand shook so violently that her phone nearly slipped from her fingers as she held it out toward me. I hesitated, a cold prickle running up my spine as I stepped closer. Whatever was on that screen had drained the color from her face in a way nothing else had. Not the sudden appearance of her husband, not the unraveling of her lies, not even the confrontation that stripped her down emotionally. When I finally took the phone, the brightness lit up my face, revealing a flurry of messages from Liam and a screenshot that made my stomach twist. It wasn't from Liam, it was about him. The screenshot showed a social media post from the restaurant we'd gone to that night. Underneath the photo of Vanessa and Liam sitting together, smiling awkwardly for the camera, people had flooded the comments with questions, then accusations, then links. Someone recognized Liam. Someone recognized Vanessa. Someone recognized both of them together. And as I scrolled, my breath caught because the pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. Liam wasn't just some guy I'd been talking to for a few weeks. He wasn't just a date who'd gotten caught in Vanessa's chaos. According to the comments and a tagged article, Liam was a newly hired consultant at a financial firm, the same firm where Vanessa had worked before she disappeared on Andrew, the same place she claimed was toxic, the same place where she said she had no close friends, the same place she had never stopped checking emails from. My pulse hammered with the sickening realization. Vanessa had known Liam long before she pretended he was my date. I looked up at her slowly, and Vanessa's expression crumpled into something between guilt and desperation. "I didn't know he'd show up there," she whispered, backing away like she expected me to explode. "It wasn't supposed to go that far. I wasn't trying to steal him. I just didn't want him to pick you over me." Her voice shook with something like terror, like she'd been waiting for this truth to catch up with her. Andrew leaned against the counter, arms crossed tightly, his face carved with disbelief. "You dated him before?" I asked, my voice eerily steady despite the storm inside me. Vanessa winced at the wording. "Not dated," she said quickly, "but we hooked up a few times before I left the company." The admission dropped like a weight onto my chest, pressing down until breathing felt like work. "So you lied," I said. "You lied about him. You lied about your past. You lied about me. And then you tried to humiliate me in public so I wouldn't get close to someone who chose me instead of you." Vanessa's silence was all the confirmation I needed. Andrew exhaled slowly, like the truth had finally snapped something inside him. "This isn't about fear or guilt," he said softly, looking at her with a mixture of sorrow and clarity. "This is about control." Vanessa's eyes filled with tears, but for once, she didn't reach for charm or manipulation. She just stood frozen, shivering in the wreckage of everything she'd tried to hide. I felt a strange calm settle over me, an exhaustion so deep it steadied my voice when I finally spoke again. "You need help," I said, not angrily but truthfully. "And I can't be your punching bag anymore. I can't be your distraction, your comparison, your safety net, or your victim." The words tasted final, and I realized I meant every single one. "Our living arrangement ends tonight. I'll move out in the morning." Vanessa flinched as if I had slapped her. But she didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just let the truth sink in, heavy and unavoidable. Andrew cleared his throat, gathering his coat from the chair. "I'm taking some time," he said to Vanessa. "I'm not making any decisions right now, but I need distance. You need to figure yourself out, without running, without hurting people on the way." Vanessa's lip trembled, and for a brief moment I saw the version of her she had always buried, the insecure, frightened girl swallowed by her own lies. But pity didn't soften anything inside me. As Andrew walked toward the door, he turned back to me. "I'm sorry for what you got pulled into," he said. "You didn't deserve any of this." I nodded, feeling an ache in my chest but also a strange sense of closure. "Thank you," I murmured. He left quietly, and the apartment felt hollow in his absence. Vanessa lingered in the doorway to her room, staring at the floor like the weight of her double life had finally pinned her down. "Elena," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I never meant to ruin your night. I met her eyes, and there was no anger left, only a boundary she could never cross again. You didn't ruin just the night, I said calmly. You ruined the trust. I turned away before she could respond, walking to my room and closing the door behind me with a soft click that felt like the ending of a long chapter. For the first time in months, I felt the quiet settle around me, not as loneliness, but as freedom.